everyone, I'm Rivonia. I'm a civil engineer and my cats think my spring cleaning solo dance sessions are epic. So recently on a drive home with a friend, they chatted about how exciting it was to hear more about LGBTQ plus inclusion in South Africa. Their innocent trip up on the LGBTQ plus part of their sentence made me think about all these labels that we use to express gender and sexual orientation. What do we understand about sexual orientation? How much do these labels actually mean? And should we even use them anyways? So today we're going to unpack and explore as much as we can the spectrum of sexual orientation. Before we dive in, let's make a quick but important mental note about the difference between sex, gender, and sexual orientation. Sex refers to the body you're in. It's biological and it's determined by chromosomes, hormonal activity, and sex organs. We refer to terms like male, female, and intersex when we're talking about sex. Gender, on the other hand, is about who you are. It's how you identify. It has nothing to do with your sex, but how you understand your own body. We use terms like man, woman, non-binary, and trans, and these are just a few of the identities you could use. This would be the TQ part of the acronym. And finally, we get to sexual orientation. Now, this is about who you are attracted to and the level of that attraction. This is not a reflection of your sex or your gender. We use terms like straight or heterosexual, gay, bisexual, lesbian, or pansexual. This would be the LGB part of the acronym. Okay, so now we have a clearer picture of what the differences are between sex, gender, and sexual orientation. We'll cover and unpack more of this in later Mila videos, but for now, let's dive into what sexual orientation is and the intricacies of it. So sexual orientation is a spectrum. It's a spectrum of the type of attraction you have and the level of intensity of that attraction. Here are some possible identities you can find along that spectrum. Some people are attracted to people of the same gender. For example, a woman can be attracted to another woman, and they might identify as lesbian. Or a man could be attracted to another man, and they might identify as gay. Some people are attracted to people of a different gender. For example, a woman could be attracted to a man, and they might identify as straight or heterosexual. Some people are attracted to both genders, men and women, and they might identify as bisexual. There's also people who are attracted to people despite the gender that they identify as, and this is called pansexual. This is the closest label I've found to understanding my sexual orientation, and it's the one I would use if I wanted to refer to a label. So part of understanding sexual orientation is understanding that there are levels of intensity of attraction. This is the asexual to sexual spectrum. There are people who are romantically and emotionally attracted to other people, but they might not want to express this in a sexual way. Some people may identify as asexual, which means that they may be romantically or emotionally attracted to someone, but they don't feel the desire to express that in a sexual way. There are other people who identify as demisexual. Now, this means they could have emotional, strong, romantic relationships, and in certain situations they might choose to express that in a sexual way. These are only a few examples of the many variations on the spectrum. I'll add a link in the description with more details on many other identities. All these labels can be really great and exciting, especially if you find one you identify with. But it can also be really overwhelming. It's a lot of new vocabulary, a lot of terms, and it can be especially difficult to identify with one, especially if you're unsure about the way you feel. In my mind, labels are here for us to understand ourselves and to find supportive communities. But if you don't find a label that you feel accurately describes who you are, and if you don't choose to use a label, it's perfectly okay as well. I think we use these labels to find the support and courage to ultimately progress to a society where we don't need labels. I didn't grow up hearing about all these terms. Boys like girls, girls like boys, and that was that. But now thinking back, I didn't have the vocabulary for it, and I didn't know these variations existed, but I definitely had emotions or feelings that weren't according to the norm. It's pretty clear now. I mean, I found both Aladdin and Jasmine pretty attractive. It was through representation on TV shows that I gained a little bit of knowledge about the spectrum. I realized how ridiculous it was that people thought about these things in such a narrow way. Later on, I was lucky enough to find a pretty open-minded, chatty, and smart group of friends who talked about the spectrum and the science behind it all. And that's when I learned about the Kinsey scale. The Kinsey scale was developed by doctors Alfred Kinsey, Wardell Pomeroy, and Clyde Martin in 1948. In South Africa, all people of different gender identities and sexual orientation are protected by our pretty progressive policies in our constitution. I mean, South Africa was the 5th country in the entire world to legalize same-sex marriages. Despite this, Progressive Prudes, a study on sexuality in South Africa, showed that 51% of our citizens don't believe that gay people should have the same rights as all other citizens. 72% of them said that same-sex sexual behavior is morally wrong. This is clearly a social challenge, which is why it's really important for us to understand each other. What most effectively shifts people's negative perceptions about others is more exposure to people with differing identities. Representation matters. Look, I know that despite the science, the constitution, and despite me telling you that all these options exist and are okay, understanding your own sexual orientation and being able to express that in society isn't always easy. So in an endeavor to help you with your personal journey, I asked a few friends who identify on various points of the spectrum to give me an idea of what they would have liked to have known in high school. Here are some replies from these brilliant people. It is often a fluid thing. Wins and celebrations are okay, but that doesn't mean that we don't have to remember all the challenges ahead of us and all the work that we still need to do. You shouldn't be opposed to something that you didn't think was true about yourself. Be open and honest about who you are to yourself and try and understand yourself. There's no rush to identify with a label if you choose to. There's no rush to declare yourself to society if you choose to, especially if you're not ready and especially if you're not safe. There are many ways to identify with, as there are many people in the world, and then some. The most important takeaway is this is your personal journey, and you get to make the rules. We'll talk about sex, gender, sexual orientation, and the LGBTQ community in future videos. But for now, check out some other interesting topics by brilliant personalities on the platform. And as always, inspire, equip, and engage.